Hi, and welcome to this video. My name is Janis and I want to share with you how you can make some generative sequences with pigments, and more precisely some percussive, tuned percussion, mallet type sequences, because the new update, Pigment 6, has a new engine called Modal that is pretty amazing for it. So let's jump right into it. First of all, when you want to use the pigment sequencer, you need to create a MIDI clip that contains one static note. So here you can see the static MIDI note, and by default it sounds like this. We're going to change it in a second. I chose a 4-bar note. It could also be just one note, but sometimes with certain modulations it's nice to have a longer note so it doesn't get re-triggered too often, also for the sequencer. But just make sure that there's no gap so that you don't have this type of note, because then here you don't trigger the sequencer. So just one long note. Inside Pigments you can enable the sequencer here. So you can first of all select the sequencer menu and then you can enable it. And now you get 16 triggers. That you can also change by individually muting notes. You could also select another pitch, etc. But since we want to make something generative, we're going to use the generative features. So on the left side, you can see that there's a dice icon, and this one lets you immediately create new sequences based on a scale you chose and you choose. And here, I particularly like the Mixolydian scale because it has a nice open vibe and it sounds really cool for those mallet type sequences, sounds. And let's just listen to a few versions. So this is quite fun. It sounds terrible though, because we're still at the basic sine wave setting. Let's get back to the sequencer in a second and just quickly modify the sound. And as I mentioned, we're going to use one of the new engines, or actually the new engine, which is called Modal. And it has a string mode, which is really fun. But for this example, we're going to use the beam mode, because this one gives you some super cool mallet type sounds. Again, you need to modify it in order to create some enjoyable sound. But I want to share with you the most important controls first, because decay is basically the length. So let's make it a bit shorter actually for now. The brilliance is basically like what it says, brilliance. So here you get a very dull sound. And here you get more of the overtones. But how much of the brilliance you get also depends on the partials, because if this one is at 0, it's dull everywhere, because with the partials you determine the amount of overtones or the harmonic content, and the higher the partial amount is, the more brightness you also get out of the synth. So those buttons really interact. So it's also nice to create some high amount of partials and to filter it with the brilliance. You get some different modes here. Pinch I don't like so much because it sounds super thin. Hollow is a more dull sound. And nylon is actually a nice balanced sound, so I'm gonna stick to nylon here. And this was just our quick setting for making the sound a tiny bit more enjoyable, and let's go back to the sequencer for now and set the sequence. So what I like to use for creating those ongoing percussive loops is to create some new melodies every now and then. So I don't want to have the same one, which is basically the idea of generative music. And here you can select a setting called auto regenerate. It's off right now, so it always plays this sequence. But if you change this to 4 bars, every 4 bars a new sequence will be created. And before playing it, let's check a few important settings. So with the probability, you can increase the chance that notes get left out. So you see here, if I increase this dice a lot, we have way less notes. But if it's on 0, we got all notes. And usually a middle setting is great because we don't want to have all the notes all the time, but we also want to have gaps. So here a medium setting is totally fine. Also nice, some velocity variation, although I don't know yet if we're going to use any velocity reaction, but probably. And octave is also fun, so sometimes it goes some octave higher or lower. So we get a wider range of pitches, which makes the sequence sound way better than staying in the same area for all the time. Gate length isn't really important here since we make percussive short sounds, and the slide also doesn't really fit. So before playing the sequence, make sure those settings look somewhat like this. And then let's listen to it and you will see that every 4 bars now the sequence will change. So that's quite fun, obviously. You can change any other scale. You can also be more precise about the tones you really want to keep. Also, you can fix or lock steps. So if you say, okay, I always want to have a C on the first position, you can actually lock it and this note will be C all the time while the other ones keep changing. So that's a really individual process here, but I'm going to keep it completely open because it's fun for creating the sound we want to create. And let's check the synth settings. So for generative type patches, it's super important to have some modulations that make the sound dynamic, because while the pitches sound interesting and the sound is somewhat okay, it's still super one-dimensional. And a super fun setting to modulate for any type of percussive loop is to modulate the decay. And we can use, for example, some LFO with a very particular setting. So we use LFO1, and the random mode is great because per trigger it sends out a random value. And I like to keep it at a super slow speed because otherwise it will change to another value after a while. You can see that it moves faster and at some point it's faster than your triggers. So we make it really slow. Keyboard trigger is fine. And then we map it to the decay and just see what happens. So it sounds way more musical, almost like a person playing it with some expression and just improvising how the individual notes get played. So that's a cool first step. And also it's super fun to apply this type of modulation to brilliance or partials, because this will give you changes in the overall timbre. And let's maybe use another LFO with the random setting because you have 3 of them, and you can also use the same ones, but here you get new random triggers, and if you use the same random LFO for everything, you will still get the same motion because they receive the same value. This is why I like to use multiple ones. So we apply LFO2, for example, and this is like some experimentation process, so it's totally possible that certain things don't work, but this is also what I would try. We try to apply it to the partials. And here we need probably more brilliance, so let's apply it to the brilliance as well. And this might be quite subtle for you to hear, but in the end, those subtle things also make the difference. So we get a little more variation here, and can also take a look at the overall envelope. We didn't do this yet, because I think it would sound great if we increased the release. So it sounds more open and more enjoyable to listen to it. Another fun setting is the friction. It basically sounds like some tiny reverb that you add to the music. Let's increase the volume. And already it sounds to me like this could be a cool modulation. So all the time I work with pigments and I move knobs, I'm not like I'm looking for the perfect setting for that knob. It's more like, okay, what could I use in order to create some cool modulation, because this knob actually has some cool effect. So for the density, we can also explore the random. I would also call them LFOs here. They are just called random because they create random curves as well. And you can also send them out per trigger. Actually, it's selected already. And we can map random 1 to the density and maybe keep it down, select plus, so it only adds values based on fundamental value. And then we see how this sounds like. This increases the jumps or makes them more narrow. It's also nice to make them a bit smoother. Actually, the rate I would keep slow, so we, again, like with the LFO, just send out one value per trigger. By the way, in case you enjoyed this video and feel like supporting the channel, you can quickly hit the like button and be also warmly invited to subscribe, since you can find many videos about pigments on my channel, but also generally about music production. And if you connect to my teaching style, be known that on my website I have some online courses, sample and sound packs, and also offer one-on-one coachings. So be warmly invited to check it out if you're interested. Links are down below in the description. We can also play with the fundamental frequency, making it a bit more airy eventually. So here you basically turn down the bass or increase it. Although here the setting is quite good, and the some detune should also be pleasant. Almost like some chorus effect. Now here's another super cool section that changes the sound a lot, and let's just start by assigning some random LFO again, and maybe this time we can share some LFO like this one and see what it does to the warp. It actually creates some, again, it creates different fragments of harmonics. Wow, this sounds so cool. I mean, you can also just check the knob without the modulation. So here it's a more dull effect. Although so cool still. While here it's way more metallic. But the modulation sounds so cool, so you get all sorts of sounds at a particular position, but also you can't predict when. Shape also changes the sound. And why don't we also apply the first one to shape? So you can totally get lost inside this engine, and I love it so much to just open Pigments, to start fiddling around, and there's usually something cool coming up every single time. And I could continue like this for hours, but let's move on to the effects section. I want to share with you some cool effects for this type of sound, because for percussive loops, delay is really fun. So for FXA, let's choose some delay and maybe even tape echo, because it sounds a bit more lo-fi. It's not the most typical delay sound, and I tend to enjoy this effect a lot. Like with Pigments, there are a few effects I really like, some I don't use so much, and tape echo is definitely one of those I like a lot. So we need to increase the intensity for getting more feedback. And there we go. We get those nice repetitions. Adding a lot of dimension to the sound. Can make it more stereo as well. Try eighth notes. Maybe that's even better. And again, you can modulate parameters here, so why don't we use another random, maybe a smoother one, for modulating the intensity. And again, we bring it in based on 0, on a faster tempo. It can jump around quite a lot. And now, sometimes we get a lot of feedback, sometimes we don't get feedback, and this way, also, we add some generative element to the music. Another one of my favorite Pigments effects is the Bitcrusher, and often just adding a tiny bit of Bitcrush with 50% dry wet and very mild setting opens up your sound so much, and it's just so much more clear. Already here you get those crystalline sounds. You can also get those super cool other distorted sounds. Not what I'm going for here, but definitely great. The downsample sounds so good. It's already a bit more extreme, the setting. And probably the downsample sounds pretty amazing with those free LFOs as well. Ooh. I like it a lot. So enjoyable. Some panning modulation could be cool as well. I mean, we're using the, don't really use the filter, but we can use, actually here we can use this, let's use LFO2 maybe, and just apply it to the panning. We're getting a bit more of a stereo effect. So cool. And we can also add some reverb with the aux. I like to do it with the aux. You just need to increase the send. Can be a large reverb. And maybe we use one of our random modulators again for increasing the reverb. Maybe we start at a mild setting and sometimes it just for certain moments increases the reverb amount. Should sound cool as well. And again, that's just a fraction of what's possible. You can get lost like crazy inside Pigments. And I just hope this video inspires you a little to explore the new engine, but you can also do it with the other engines and to create some super cool generative sequences, because I think it's just a total powerhouse for making anything generative. If you're interested in getting some more ideas on how you can use Pigments, there's a full playlist here containing lots of tutorials. And here's another playlist with some more general tips and tricks on music production. And apart from that, I just wish you lots of inspiration with whatever it is that you create and really hope to see you soon at this channel. Bye.